Thank you. Thanks for that great introduction. As was said, the Council of Great City Schools has been a fantastic partner. We share a set of common goals. We understand how challenging those goals are, but we've got a commitment to stick with it and help these students as much as we can. I decided to use this venue to share some thoughts about the work our foundation has done over the last 17 years in education and talk a bit about what our priorities are going to be for the 5 years going forward. You probably know that our foundation really operates in two big areas. We work to help the global poor, and all the work we do in health is around that. We have a big set of programs there. Very excited about the progress being made there, including things like, hopefully, eradicating polio in the next few years. So that's a big branch of activity. The other is our work here in the United States, which is almost entirely focused on education. And the K through 12 part is the biggest single program there, although we also work with scholarships, libraries, colleges, community colleges, to help out with education as well. And that work is very important to us because we think it's so key to the future of America, whether it's the economic strength of the country or, probably more importantly, our commitment that individuals have an opportunity to succeed. And so every student should get a great public education and graduate with skills to succeed in the marketplace. So the role of philanthropy here is not to be the primary funder, but rather to fund pilots, to fund new ideas, to let people, it's always the educators coming up with the ideas, to let them try them out and see what really works super well and get those to scale. If we look at the overall numbers in terms of where we are in education, I don't think any of us are satisfied. The basic metrics on math scores, English scores, comparison to other countries, college completion, we still have a lot that we can do there. We need to bring these numbers up quite a bit. There's really two challenges. There's bringing the numbers up for everyone, and then there's the disparities. And the disparities are still very large. One can go as far as to say, if you look into those numbers, you almost see two different countries. One where suburban white students perform almost as well as other developed countries, and another where inner city students and Black and Latino students perform pretty much at the lowest end of all the developed countries. And that includes dropout rates, it includes math achievement, and of course that unfortunately correlates with their opportunities later in life, their employment, their salary level, and their basic satisfaction is deeply affected by that K through 12 experience. You know, the overall graduation rate from post-secondary institutions has stayed essentially flat. And so if we look at what the job market, the opportunities that are being created, they're actually shrinking for people who don't have some sort of post-high school certificate, and they're growing for those who do, and yet the supply side is not there. So we really need to get kids ready for those new jobs of the future. There are signs of progress. Over the past decade, many cities who focused in on particular things have made progress. One of the interesting things we did in our early years was really get the dropout rate to focus on the 9th grade class versus 12th grade graduation. We did some work with Urban Institute and others that really looked at that figure, and it's been fantastic to see people really studying those, and they're, you know, by looking into that, understanding what's going on, some cities in particular have done well, like Charlotte, Austin, and Fresno. big increases. We also see in some of the early grades where there's been more time for these improvements to get into place. The fourth grade reading and math scores in large city schools increased almost at double the rate of public schools nationally, and eighth grade scores as well. So in education, of course, there's huge lag time between when you start to improve things and when you see the ultimate outcome, which is that lifetime opportunity. But many of these intermediate goals are starting to show progress and also showing us who the exemplars are that we should go and learn from so that we can try to scale these things up. I'll talk a lot about this challenge of scale because the contrast between doing a visit and seeing some great practices and then thinking, okay, will that really get out to the mass of students? That gap is one that I know frustrates us all, and yet I think we're getting smarter about how to close that gap. When we look at this fiscally, over the last 20 years, the spending on K through 12 as a percentage of the economy has gone up somewhat, while the achievement has only gone up modestly. And unfortunately, I wish I could say that percentage will grow significantly. But if you look at state governments, the resources they have, and the costs that healthcare in many different forms, including Medicaid, will put onto those budgets, the likelihood that in most states we'll get large increases in that respect, particularly once all the long-term liabilities are well understood, that will be a real challenge. So it means all the more we have to take the best ideas where people are working with today's resources and getting great results and get those out to everyone. So it's raising that absolute level, and it's working on the disparity and those inequities that have been fairly persistent. So to go back through our history, our foundation, we view our role as catalytic, finding somebody who's got a great idea and helping them scale it up, really measure it properly and learn about it, and hopefully having that go out into very large numbers. One of the things we did at the very beginning was that we'd met some educators that were pioneering this idea of smaller high schools. And so we did a number of grants where somebody would either create a number of new small schools or they literally would take a very large high school and break it up into smaller high schools. And there were some really good results that came out of that. It didn't work in all places, but in most places it did. For example, in New York City, graduation rates of students attending small schools was more than 30% percentage points higher than the schools they replaced. And almost half of the students attending small schools enrolled in post-secondary education, which was a 20% increase above schools with the same demographics. We also had good results in other places, Los Angeles, Rio Grande Valley in Texas. But over time, although we still believe in this work can be done, we saw that the chance of this having a super large impact was limited, partly because the impact level didn't get us all the way to where we wanted to go, but also the financial and political cost of doing these school reorganizations was never going to get beyond 10% of the student body. And so, given that our goal is to help the majority of all students, we decided that we needed to focus in other areas. That had never been our sole focus, but we decided that would shrink as a percentage what we were doing. At that point, a lot of our focus was on teaching because we saw that there were amazing teachers, and understanding what was it about those incredible teachers and how could you raise the average practice to be close to that top 20%, that was an area of great fascination. And so we funded a thing called Measuring Effective Teaching. There was a lot of videotaping done to look at these incredible teachers and compare what was going on in that classroom versus other classrooms. There were some phenomenal insights that I think were absolutely critical that came out of that. The best teachers were far more interactive in how they engaged those students. The level of energy, the challenge to the students, noticing which students were getting bored or not paying attention. You know, those top teachers were really quite phenomenal. And there were a lot of great tools created around this. The idea of a student survey where you ask students about do they feel they get helped out when the subject is challenging? Do they feel that the class stays on task? Not just questions about do you like your teacher, because that can be confounded by other things. But those student surveys turned out to be a great form of feedback for teachers. The idea of videotaping, which has become very inexpensive, where you can then share your lesson with other teachers, get feedback from them, or even send it off to someone who, using online, can comment and talk to you about where you're most effective and where you're not. The idea of a rubric that in particular focused on this interactivity, how you were engaging the students so that they were thinking deeply about the problems. There were things about peer evaluation, ways of reforming the scheduled days so that teachers have more time to talk to each other. A lot of great things came out of this focus on teaching and their best practices. And the idea of multiple measures, getting teachers' feedback, it was stunning at the beginning how few teachers would be getting feedback of any kind, and that their desire to have feedback was very high. Now, if that feedback came with personnel action and the bureaucracy potentially misinterpreting the results, it wasn't always something that they looked forward to. So that connection to the evaluation system was always going to be a very big challenge. The work we did to help teachers with this evaluation of multiple measures, in many of the cities we worked, like in Memphis, it had very strong results. It's also been done in other places where we weren't the key funder, but Cincinnati, Chicago, New York City, Washington, D.C., helping to identify teachers and show them how they can improve, that is something that continues to be a very, very worthy focus. The challenge is that even that piece, when it's done very well, the teacher in the classroom, that again is not enough to get the full result we want. And this is something I'm sure has been obvious to all of you, but it's really the entire school where the leadership, the development, the overall culture, the analysis of what's going on with the kids, it's that school level where you really have to get everything coming together on behalf of the students. One other thing that we backed, which we do think is important going forward, is the Common Core. This was the idea that instead of being fragmented across the country, that we would get the very best input on how to have rigorous standards and what the sequencing should be. You know, as you teach writing, as you teach reading, how do you evaluate where that student is, and across the various courses that touch on that, make sure the teachers are intervening in the right way. You know, the Common Core has got wide adoption, and what we're seeing is year after year, the curriculum, the teacher training around that, the online materials connected to that, all of those things continue to grow, and so we think that's an important contribution. So we will continue to work on that curricula and professional development that defines that a level of rigor. So I mentioned schools that are really tracking what's going on and then figuring out in their community which resources are best to intervene. That's where there have been the best results over the last 10 years. And the indicators are many different things. It includes, of course, test scores, attendance, suspensions, grades, the course signups, the credit accumulation that's taking place, and really thinking about, is this student on track, and how could we intervene with that student, his parents, the various resources there are to help all these students achieve their full potential. And there are key points of intervention, which being very data-driven, very continuous performance-oriented, really has shown that there are people doing this very, very well. So what does that mean for our work with you and others? It means that we'll no longer directly invest in teacher evaluation, but we'll continue to gather data on the impact of these systems and encourage the use of all of those tools that help teachers improve their practice. Second, our big focus really will be on networks of schools. Sometimes that'll be districts, sometimes that'll be set of schools, but schools that are committed to using a data-driven continuous learning and evidence-based intervention to drive student achievement. Third, we're increasing our commitment to help to develop great curriculum and professional development aligned to state standards. Fourth, we'll continue to be involved with charters, helping them to drive high quality and deal with some of the things where they've still have challenges, including in the area of special needs students. There's a lot of great learning out of charters. In general, philanthropic dollars, their percentage on charters is fairly high. We will be a bit different because of our scale. We feel that we need to put the vast majority of our money into these networks of public schools. So we love charters. Hopefully it's an environment where learnings come out of the charters and really do get applied where we've got large numbers of students. And the last category we'll work in is innovative research. This idea of technology and digital approaches, we all see promise there, particularly in things like digital learning, redefining what homework is like, how you can help out a student that falls behind. But we still haven't had the breakthrough there where that's making a big difference, so we'll be a funder there. Overall, during the next 5 years, our K through 12 investments will be a bit over $1.7 billion. And just to, thank you. And the majority of that, in fact, over 60%, will support these new networks and the curricula that they'll be using. And in a sense, this will be driven, the actual tactics about great teaching, about how to reform the schedule, how to get students who are off track on track, those will be driven by the schools themselves. Other than an approach of continuous improvement and really being driven by the data, we will let people come to us with the set of approaches they think will work for them in their local context. These data systems are more widespread now, but part of our role will be to make sure those are even better. We have examples, a lot of examples, where data systems have really driven impactful action. For example, in Fresno, the data revealed that students weren't aware of their college options. So the district created individualized college information packets for every senior who met the state's college requirements. And the result there was a 50% increase in the number of students applying to the public universities. And so all the kids who really had the ability to go to those more challenging schools immediately saw that, and that had significant impact. Summit Public Schools, 11 school charter operation in California and Washington, really looked at their data on English language learners. And they were challenged there because some of the kids who started behind never caught up. But what they did is they went through their data and they saw that some of their teachers were doing far better on this than others. And so they took those teachers and had them train the other teachers, had them go through those training materials, the curriculum, to drive those best practices. And so after a year, the performance gap between the English language learners and others dropped by 25%. And so data helped them go in and pick the right people to do that. Chicago, who's had some good results, researchers found that if you look at the 9th grade data, in particular 4 indicators, attendance, course completion, accredited communication and grades, that if those are adequate, you're more than 4 times likely to graduate. Just taking grades alone, if they're B+ or higher, their chance of succeeding in college is dramatically higher. And so taking those insights, which came from the data, the school leaders in Chicago partnered with the University of Chicago to create their network for college success. And that network of schools is really using data to identify strategies that educators can use. From 2007 to 2015, the percentage of students on track to graduate from those high schools rose from 61 to 85%. And four-year college enrollment rates went from 36% to 44%. So that, is a substantial increase compared to the current national situation that's largely flat. So these kinds of approaches where groups of schools or networks of schools have the flexibility to propose the approaches they want, we think that this will lead to more impactful and durable systemic changes that, with luck, will be attractive enough to be widely adopted by other schools. We're seeing more examples of this all the time. The core districts in California, composed of 8 of the largest school districts in the state, the LIFT network in Tennessee, which includes educators from 12 rural and urban districts across the state. There are many of these networkings emerging. And so our biggest investment will be supporting these networks and the intermediaries who support these networks, starting initially with high-need schools, and probably there'll be 6 to 8 states that a high percentage of the networks will be in. Each network will be backed by a team of education experts skilled in continuous improvement, coaching, data collection, and analysis. And so these networks, we expect, will end up being very different, but they'll all have this commitment to continuous improvement and a commitment to use the data to drive examination of are these students making progress. Beyond that, we're going to be fascinated to see which interventions come along. Will it be curriculum? Will it be support for particular groups? All of these things will emerge, and I think there's certainly a menu of them that people know, but part of the beauty of the flexibility here is that some may emerge that we don't expect. We do hope the whole goal here, of course, is to share the results, including the things that don't go well, so that other people don't go down the same path if that's not fruitful. We'll work with teacher and leader preparation providers to ensure that these lessons and best practices are incorporated in local programs to sustain this work. I mentioned high-quality curricula, and that is an area where we feel like we've underinvested. We know that great curricula combined with taking the professional development and really connecting it to those lessons, that's where it has the greatest impact. And so our goal is to work with the field to make sure that 5 years from now, teachers at every level in secondary school have high-quality, aligned curriculum in English, math, and science. In a few places, we'll also support pilots of scalable professional development supports that are, as I said, connected to this curriculum. Louisiana is a great example where aligned curriculum and professional development has helped teachers. 80% of districts have adopted fully aligned curricula in grades 3 through 8, and the state has created a marketplace of preferred professional development services to help schools implement these curricula. Teachers report that they feel more equipped to help students meet the standards, for example, by closely reading texts to understand their meaning. In Washington, D.C., the district has developed an innovative professional development program that is discipline-specific, curriculum-aligned, and focused on improving teachers' instructional skills. Teachers meet weekly with a coach who's an expert in the subjects they teach. They meet in small groups with colleagues who teach the same subject to talk through lesson plans. While still early, 87% of teachers say the collaboration is improving their practice and knowledge. Another 25% of our funding over the next 5 years will focus on some big bets in innovation, things that have the chance to really change the trajectory. We have a lot of enabling elements here. Broadband access, although not completely solved, is not the barrier that it was. Students having access to a screen, as long as it includes a small phone-sized screen, is not a limit whatsoever, and actually some of the learning stuff can connect up to that device that they're using perhaps even more than they should. And in parallel, there is finally research that helps us understand cognitive development and therefore what type of curriculum can draw students in. Curriculum to some degree is about keeping kids interested and fascinated. The biggest difference is not that the facts are in one and not in the other. It's presented in a way that's understandable and very, very interesting. Now, this whole idea of research and development to improve education, in my opinion, it's very underfunded. If you took all the different economic activities and said which should have the most research going against it, I think education would stand out because it's sort of the master switch of your capabilities in all your other areas of endeavor. If you can, make education better, then, it's every part of the economy is benefiting from that. But because of the structure we have, government spending on R&D in this space is very low, with less than 1% of that overall spend. So I do think that is something where philanthropy does have a fairly unique role to play, whether it's in the near-term evaluation of things that are very clear, or even in taking some things like learning agents that are completely unproven. In the best case, will take 5 to 10 years to get those things to be very, very strong, yet that investment makes sense. We shouldn't just be using AI for very advanced things. We should be using it for the most basic things of drawing kids in and making learning more fun for them and more effective. Math is a particular area where we want to have very strong evidence about what works. For example, mastery of algebra. That's such a barrier. A lot of kids' self-image is really put into a negative mode when they think, okay, am I good at algebra? No, the other kids are, I'm not, and that affects your trajectory. We'd like to make that achievable and enjoyable for all those kids with the positive self-image that applies. We anticipate that another 15% of our spending in the next 5 years, which is the final thing, now it's up to 100%, will go to that charter sector. And that includes expanding charters nationwide, expanding charters in Washington State, where we have a particular initiative. But a lot of this money will actually be related to special needs students. Kids with mild to moderate learning and behavioral disabilities, all schools, including the charters, have challenges with them. And so we'll partner with the charters who really want to up their game substantially in that, trying out new approaches. So those are the areas of investment. We look back at the last 17 years and feel very good about the partnerships we've had, the things we've done. During that time, working in the cities that you represent, we've invested over $1 billion. And we really do think that a lot of that has laid the foundation for the years ahead, where we all want to see these things scale out and have an even more dramatic impact. U.S. education is without a doubt one of the most challenging areas for philanthropy or for our foundation. But it takes a long-term commitment. It takes even, on our part, continuous learning, looking at the data, applying that to ourselves as well. The model that always excites me is that if you can get a pilot to work well, then if you can scale it up and you can see if it sustains itself. And it is easy to fool yourself because whenever you do a pilot, you're often getting the best schools, the best teachers, even the students who get engaged in these programs. So it's easy to fool yourself that something works better than you think it does, or that getting it adopted by all the teachers and all the schools, that will be very straightforward. We've even seen in some cases, like teacher evaluation, even in our pilot locations, that sustaining it for the long term, when there's changes in leadership, the union, the school board, the superintendent, that can be very difficult. So we don't want to underestimate this challenge of taking something that looks very good in the small and saying, okay, the easy step is to get that out to all their students. But I truly believe that for many of the things that are going on in your schools today, that is achievable. So our role is to be a catalyst of good ideas, driven by these guiding principles, helping all students, especially helping low-income students and students of color, so that everyone has access to a great public education, fully preparing them for adulthood. We won't give up on this until it's been achieved, and we look forward to continued partnership with you in this work in the years to come. Thank you.
We have time for just a few questions. Mr. Gates is going to have to go about 1:30, but we have time for a handful of questions. So, question here? If you could introduce yourself.
Thank you, Barbara Jenkins.
Sorry.
You want me to shout?
Now, see if it's on.
Testing. Can you hear me now? Yes. Mr. Gates, thank you for your tireless investment, all that you've done for public education. We always say philanthropists can decide where to invest their money. We are deeply grateful for you investing in the youth of our country. Here's my question. Here's my question. Barbara Jenkins, Orange County Public Schools, we've had some success we're very proud of in school improvement and in digital curriculum, but miles to go. So which of the indicators do you think are the most important for the improvement process you described at the school level?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because if you say, what's our real goal? We'd like to look at these kids in adulthood and say, are they economically satisfied? Are they, a great citizen? Are their social skills all developed in a way that we'd all understand what success looks like? But that, particularly for a young kid, that's 20 years down the road before you get that. And so the key indicator-wise is to move back in time and try to figure out what short-term things, like are they coming to school? Are they signing up for the courses that would eventually let them go to college? We have to make sure we're looking at the right near-term indicators and then putting in front of each school, okay, what are our tactics to drive those things? And we always have to keep an eye on, are the things, those short-term improvements we're making, are those the things that connect to long-term success? So one of the things I'm really pleased with is now there's more feedback back into high schools about the students that they send off and think, hey, I think we did a good job for this kid. How do they do? Which one of them make it through a four-year institution? Which ones do not? Is there any understanding of what the gap was there? If you graduate somebody and they have to immediately go into a remedial class, the chance of their graduating is very low. And I was glad the council has as one of its metrics looking at kids and saying, okay, how many of them go to college but start off with that experience, that both in terms of their time, their self-image, and chance of success, although we can improve it a lot, that's an investment area for us, if you want to avoid that as much as possible. And so it's a cascade of data, going all the way back to elementary school. I personally think a lot of things around reading and writing are very fundamental. And that we know now, that even when we try to catch up in middle school and high school, even if we do a lot of things, actually in math we sometimes do catch up. In reading and writing it's less common. And so having those right metrics. In high school, I do think there's been a lot of progress on this, particularly looking at ninth graders and saying, okay, is it talking to their parents, talking to them, comparing what's your aspiration, and hey, the courses you're taking and your aspiration just aren't fitting together. And so picking that right data, I do think we've made progress, and we can make more now that these data systems are more pervasive, even across the boundaries.
Mr. Gates, thank you for being here. Richard Carranza, Houston Independent School District. So you have a unique perspective and a unique vantage point over the last 17 years with school improvement. Could you point to one or two specific school systems or networks that are having particular success given the school improvement process you've outlined and spoken of here this afternoon?
Well, I think we all know, some of these success stories. I talked a bit about Chicago, which was a network our foundation wasn't involved with as directly, but I think is really a great exemplar. There's the work in Washington, D.C., which of course went through a lot of turmoil, but over time and multiple superintendents, the achievement there is far better than it was. We were very involved in Hillsborough and Memphis. In both those locations, there's been improvement, not to the full level that we had hoped for, but still very substantial improvement in both those cases. New Orleans is an example where you wouldn't wish a disaster on anyone as the impetus to go and do some things afresh, but in fact the Reform School District there has very good results. Now, in all of those cases that I just mentioned, a lot of it is taking an inner city school district that was below the average and moving them up to or even just slightly past the average. Even in those cases, though, the racial or income gaps are still fairly strong. And so if we say, is there any city-sized district, say over 30,000 students, where you can go in and say, hey, this is exactly where we all want to go. Let's all just go visit there and adopt what they're doing. No. As far as I know, and I don't think we all would have missed it as a group, we don't have that yet. What we have is some really good practices, still dependent on strong leadership, still dependent on getting the community behind the idea that the status quo is not acceptable. And so you need to take a leap of faith that something different is going to happen here. And when that does, we do see some of these improvements. The charters have some good numbers if you look at the very good charters, but of course, those are the students who select to go in there, and they get a from-scratch type environment, which is not the hand that's dealt to most people. So, I think it's these various points of light, but no single district that is beating Korea, say.
I think we have time for one more question.
Mr. Gates, Michael O'Neill, Chairman of the Boston School Committee, a city you know well. And thank you for being here today. As a member of the Executive Committee, thank you for so much of the intellectual and financial support you've provided to so many of our member districts over the years. And as Tip O'Neill said, all politics is local. So thank you for what you have done for Boston schools over the years as well. And as a school board member, school boards and districts can be autonomous and parochial sometimes. And I'm intrigued in how you see the role of districts in the school network approach that you've described today.
Yeah, in some cases, particularly for larger cities, the network will just be the district, where the district is building the data systems. In some cases, particularly for smaller districts, we'll pick an intermediary that will work with a number of districts simultaneously, or a subset of schools inside those districts. So, of course, the scale between New York City and a rural school district is, over a factor of 100 difference there. So we'll be a bit flexible about that. Often the strength of the intermediary, if a district sees the skills that they have and are very interested in that, that'll be part of how it comes together. Another valuable thing for us is we want to go to other philanthropists who want to fund public schools, particularly in the community they grew up and they live in, but exactly figuring out, okay, how do I do philanthropy for public schools is a challenge to them. And so going to them and saying, okay, we'll partner with you. You'll know more about the local conditions and relationships. You will get great visibility for being a great partner with these schools. So join us in this network. So we're hoping that over half the networks we do, we have local philanthropists who are also significant backers helping us to track and make sure there's the political will to drive those things forward and overall draw more creative ideas and more resources into the sector. And so, Bob Hughes and Alan Golston, as they're figuring out these networks that will, plan that out over the next 2 years, we're pretty open-minded. We haven't set down today, it's X% big cities, X% just districts. And so we're going to, be in a dialogue with all of you. And over the next 2 years, there'll be 20 to 30 of these networks that we'll move forward with.
Could we have a big round of applause for Mr. Bill Gates?
Thank you. Thank you all for your work.